In May 1940, with France under Nazi control, Churchill knew that war in Western Europe had been lost, so looked for a way to still take the fight to the enemy. Hugh Dalton was appointed as Minister for Economic Warfare, with specific responsibility for coordinating secret operations. From this, the S.O.E, or Special Operations Executive, was officially formed on the 22nd of July 1940, an amalgamation of 3 existing secret organisations. In his diary entry for that day, Dalton records that Churchill told him, "And now go and set Europe ablaze." When the S.O.E was formed, it requisitioned around 80 country houses across England, which became designated stations. And in fact, they requisitioned so many country estates in the early years of the war that it gained the nickname Stately Homes of England. Each station had a special role to play in the war. From research to reconnaissance, these stately homes of England were transformed into effective workhorses for Britain. Now a private residence, I am here at what once was Station 6, part of the many estates concentrated in Hertfordshire, with the common goal to disrupt Nazi progress in the war. The owners of this incredible country estate have given us special access to look around and delve into this once top secret history. The S.O.E was determined to conduct reconnaissance missions in Nazi-occupied Europe, aid local European resistance movements, and conduct acts of espionage and sabotage which required training up special agents.
So the S.O.E operated mainly in Nazi-occupied Europe to aid those resistance fighters and to disrupt Nazi progress. But later, they also started to stray into occupied territory in Southeast Asia. It operated actually in all occupied territories unless it was agreed otherwise with our allies that they wouldn't.
The S.O.E set up numerous bases and stations across Britain. These bases comprised of training centres, code-breaking centres, and experimental centres. Examples of training centres include Wanborough Manor in Surrey, where agents carried out their initial training, and Arizag House in Inverness-shire, which specialised in commando-style training. An example of a code-breaking centre was the famous Bletchley Park near Milton Keynes, which deciphered messages from Germany. Examples of experimental centres include Aston House near Stevenage, responsible for researching and developing sabotage explosives and weapons, the Thatched Barn near Boreham Wood, which housed the S.O.E's camouflage section, and Bontex Knitting Mills in Wembley, a wireless section production station. Bride Hall, where I am today, was known as Station 6. It was the S.O.E's small arms and weapons acquisition section, responsible for acquiring, testing and developing weapons for the S.O.E agents. This beautiful and vast country estate can be dated back to the 12th century, and since then has had many different owners who have adapted and changed the site to fit their contemporary ideals. But during the 1940s, we know that there were a number of operational buildings and areas that helped in the day-to-day running of the station that are still standing today. The main house would have been living quarters for the officers who were stationed here. The orchard and some of the woodland areas would have been dedicated firing ranges to test out the weapons, but the focal point of Station 6 was the 3 barns. One of the barns was used as an armoury, where acquired weapons were repaired and serviced. The second barn was used for storing ammunition, bombs and machine guns, while the third barn provided sleeping quarters for the other ranks. This barn would have been heated by 2 wood-burning stoves, which can still be seen today. To find out more about the weapons that were acquired and tested at Station 6, I am meeting historian Paul Fletcher in one of the barns on the site. So Station 6 would have been where the weapons would have been brought and tested, and in these barns some of them would have been stored. But where did these weapons actually come from?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. So there are 2 sources initially of weapons for the S.O.E. The first was by public donation. About 10,000 weapons were given by the British public to the government. Secondly, a further 10,000 weapons were bought on the market by the government, giving us a total of about 20,000 weapons. These weapons were then distributed out to the S.O.E. training stations for use by their field agents.
And we've got just examples of British people donating and purchasing, or was it further afield?
Yes, we have donations from American police departments, and also the government went out and sourced weapons on the global market. So we know, for example, they bought about 10,000 handguns from Argentina and a further supply of small machine guns from Sweden.
So we've got thousands of these weapons being brought over to Britain, but have we got any specific examples of the equipment that perhaps was here?
Yes, we do. We do. So we know that the S.O.E. developed different bits of kit which might be used by the agents in the field. So, for example, we know that they were developing lightweight transistor radios, which could be hidden inside suitcases. We also know they were developing plastic explosives. We know they were developing coat buttons, which could be used as cyanide pills if an agent was captured. However, Station 6, which is where we are today, and Station 9, which is very, very close by, are primarily known for the development of the well rod, the well gun, and the well bike. The well rod was a bolt-action pistol. It was used primarily by the French resistance, and about 2,800 were developed.
And same success for the well gun?
No, it wasn't. The well gun was a small submachine gun, but it was never actually developed.
And last but not least, although it's obvious, the well bike, what did this include? What was it used for?
It was a motorcycle, which could be actually then folded in on itself. It was used primarily by the British 1st and 6th Airborne Divisions, and about 3,500 were developed in 1942 and 1943.
I notice a pattern here. We've got well rod, well bike and well gun, but why do they all have the prefix well?
Well, that's a very good question. It's very simple. It's down to geography. Station 9 and Station 6 are very near to Welwyn Garden City. So Welwyn gives you well.
The buildings at Bride Hall aren't the only evidence to show how it was used during World War II. Paul takes me to an area in Station 6 where some testing must have been carried out.
So here we are today, 75 years after the end of World War II, at Station 6. And if you look over there in that flower bed down there, perhaps you might be able to find some evidence of exactly what Station 6 was up to during World War II. So have a look.
Okay.
Okay, what have you got?
I think this is a bullet casing.
Yeah, I would agree with you. So why is it here? So if you look closely around you, what can you see?
Well, we're very close to the barns.
We are. So that means that it's very, very unlikely that this actually was the firing range. Probably the firing range was farther away in one of the orchards over there. Now, what I think is happening here is that S.O.E. operatives basically are taking the weapons used that day and they're cleaning them out, and they are leaving the discarded shell casings down there in the flower bed. Okay? In total, the S.O.E. probably acquired and used about 100,000 weapons during World War II. So that's a huge testimony to both the contribution of the British public and to the efforts made by the S.O.E. during World War II. And they are some evidence of the actual Station 6 in action.
Absolutely.
It's estimated that the S.O.E. had a staff of 10,000 men and 3,000 women, and these candidates were chosen from all classes, all occupations. The essentials were a deep knowledge of the country that they were an agent in and their ability to pass as a native, especially in France. In other places like Greece and Albania, this was less necessary as there was an open resistance there, but it also meant that the S.O.E. were slightly less effective in those regions.
Every S.O.E. agent selected would go through a rigorous training programme to ensure that they were ready for the ranging challenges and missions that they could face. Other than basic fitness, other physical training ranged from how to fire weapons properly and efficiently to jumping out of an aeroplane using a parachute properly. As well as pushing physical boundaries, the S.O.E. agents had to test their mental and intellectual capabilities, from learning Morse code and remembering the different Nazi soldier ranks. S.O.E. agents were trained in basic acts of sabotage, making and using explosive devices that could derail trains and stop cars.
The S.O.E. ignored social conventions and they accepted people no matter their sexuality, their creed, heritage, communists, anti-British nationalists, anyone that could really work towards this war effort and overcome fascism. So many could be described as having a thirst for adventure, and that was one of the things at the core of being part of the S.O.E. It was very modern, women were active agents, and in fact I think this was possibly very rare, if not the only example of women being allowed to carry out combat operations for Britain during World War II.
Although we know a lot more about the S.O.E. today and can certainly appreciate the secrecy of their operations, their reputation at the time isn't necessarily what you might expect. So what was the S.O.E.'s reputation at the time like?
You might expect it to be very, very good, given Churchill's support. But actually, many officers in the conventional army questioned the S.O.E. and its effectiveness. For them, it was too unorthodox, and there were allegations of brutality. However, I think we do have to remember that this was a war to the death, and that over a quarter of the agents who served in the field did actually die.
So how significant was the S.O.E. in winning World War II in Europe?
Personally, I think they were very significant. They were clearly the mainstay of the French resistance between 1940 and 1944. And in addition to that, the S.O.E. was involved in a number of very, very significant operations, such as the assassination of Heydrich, a leading Nazi in Czechoslovakia, and the telemark operation in Norway.
So that's the positives. Are there any negative aspects of their work?
Probably the biggest negative aspect was the fact that the Nazis would take reprisals after successful operations. So, for example, they killed over 5,000 men, women and children in Czechoslovakia, in particular in the village of Lidice, in reprisal for the assassination of Heydrich. But Eisenhower, who was Commander-in-Chief of Western forces in Europe, said that, in his opinion, the work of the S.O.E. shortened the war by about 6 months. And who am I to disagree with that opinion?
So long term, can we see the impact of the S.O.E. today?
Yes, we can, but not as much as you might think so. There are, to my knowledge, only 2 public memorials in Britain, which I find quite strange given how much they did. In popular culture, we can see an impact. For example, Marvel's Agent Carter and Batman's Butler, both were S.O.E. agents. And then, of course, everyone's heard of James Bond, and he apparently is based upon at least 2 agents who worked during World War II. In more modern times, I believe that the S.O.E. also makes an appearance in a number of video games. One of these is Call of Duty World War II, But you know what? I'm way too old to know much about that.
The agents of S.O.E. demonstrated tremendous courage, and they enjoyed so many successes, especially in their guerrilla war against Hitler's forces and against the Axis powers around the world, from Europe and across to Asia. And of course, Churchill was one of their biggest supporters. But the S.O.E. was abolished in January 1946. We've got to remember that after Churchill's election defeat in July 1945, they lost one of their biggest supporters. So it faced quite renewed opposition from the Secret Intelligence Service and those that were competing for this mandate to conduct covert and intelligence operations and secret operations on behalf of Great Britain. But today, secret intelligence services and our intelligence services in the United Kingdom, well, they offer so much to the S.O.E. because so many of their staff transitioned over, their training and their research staff, into those organisations. So we have a debt of gratitude to pay to the men and women, those pioneering figures in the Special Operations Executive.
During the Second World War, the buildings at Bride Hall were requisitioned and used by the Ministry of Defence. Its barns were utilised as buildings for the designing, testing and storing of military equipment. The S.O.E. and the operators at this station helped the nation extensively during the war through tactics of secret agents and concealed deadly weaponry. Without them, the outcome of the war would have certainly been very different. Churchill's vision was to set Europe ablaze through the S.O.E., and set Europe ablaze he did.